In this segment, we will look at the Bible through the lens of archaeology. Archaeology is the study of human history through artifacts. It is a subfield of anthropology, which is the study of human culture. Archaeology as we know it is rather young. It has only been in existence since the 19th century. The scientists who study human history through human artifacts are called archaeologists. They find that ancient civilizations frequently built new layers directly on top of old layers, and over time, those layers formed mounds that they refer to as a tell. By digging and sifting through the layers of a tell very carefully, they find artifacts from each layer that helps them understand the history of the people that lived at that site. By using logic, experience, and clues from the ground, history can seem to come alive, and evidence can be discovered that either confirms or denies the history recorded in the Bible. Typically, pottery is used as the method of classifying the historical time period of each layer in a dig site, so we may hear some archaeologists refer a lot to pottery as we proceed through the series, and this is why. To begin, we will note this important and logical fact. Because of the destructive nature of the flood, archaeology only accurately picks up after this great catastrophe in history, even if it does not believe in it. Also, archaeologists use thermoluminescent dating to date ancient pottery. But before the flood, there are good reasons to believe that the cosmic radiation amounts, which that method of dating heavily relies on, would have been radically different than they would have been after the flood. For that reason, we must be very skeptical of any dates that precede the time of the flood, because they are assuming things that they cannot be sure of. The Bible, more than any other ancient text, makes many detailed historical claims, and the field of archaeology should be able to either confirm or refute those claims when it investigates the historical accounts that the Bible speaks about. This makes the study of the Bible through the lens of archaeology a perfect introductory exercise. The Bible provides a record of the people of Israel that descended from Abraham, and if it is actually contradicted by archaeology, it would be a great challenge to its credibility. This makes the Bible uniquely and historically testable. Objective archaeology should either become a great foundational support for the Bible or its fiercest enemy. To begin, we will look 10 miles southwest of Nasiriyah, Iraq. An ancient Mesopotamian city located south of the Euphrates River in Iraq was officially excavated under the supervision of C. Leonard Woolley in the 1920s and 1930s. It has been confirmed that this site was the ancient Mesopotamian city of Ur, and it was active around the time of Genesis 11:31, over 4,000 years ago. Why is this biblically important? In Genesis 11:31, we read, Terah, Abram, Lot, and Sarai set out together from the city of Ur. This is where Abraham started from. Let's take a video tour of this important site in biblical history and see why this discovery testifies to the validity of Abraham's history that the Bible records.
Have you ever heard of Ur of the Chaldees? Well, if you've read your Bible, you should have, because it's mentioned 4 times in the biblical record, although actually each of those 4 times virtually says the same thing. I'll read you, for instance, what it says in Genesis chapter 11 and in verse 31, where it says, And Terah took his son Abraham and his grandson Lot, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan. So in other words, the only reference to Ur of the Chaldees is the reference to Abraham leaving his home place there and going to the land of Canaan. Now, there are no historical records about Ur of the Chaldees, and so apart from the Bible, there's no mention of it. And so guess what the critics said? Oh, well, they said Ur of the Chaldees, just a figment of the Bible writer's imagination, just a legend. Or if it was actually a place, just some obscure little village in Mesopotamia, we don't know where it was. And so they just wrote it off as a Bible blunder. Now I'd like you to come with me to southern Iraq, to a site called Tel El Makaya. And here we find a ziggurat, or temple tower, and it literally means in Arabic, mound of pitch. Now it is called this because all the bricks of this ziggurat are stuck together with bitumen or pitch, and so they call it Tel El Makaya, mound of pitch. Well, it was in 1854 that the British Museum sent a message to the British consul in Mosul. You see, Layard had dug up so many winged bulls in Assyria and sent them back to the British Museum, and the British public were hungry for more. And so the museum sent a message to its consul there saying, hey old boy, see if you can get us some more stuff to put in the museum, will you? And so Taylor, seeing in this an opportunity for a little diversion for him from his boring consular activities, readily agreed. He rounded up some Arab workmen, got some donkeys and picks and shovels and all the rest of it, and away they went to Tel El Makaya. Well, when Taylor got there, he saw this big ziggurat, you know, and he thought, now this must be some fabulous treasures inside this. So he walked all round it, tapping on the sides, hoping to find some hollow sound which would betray a room or some place inside where there could be stored some valuables. But that temple tower or ziggurat was just as solid as the Rock of Gibraltar, and there was no echo from within. Well, Taylor was undaunted. He took his men up to the top of the tower and started savagely attacking it with his picks and shovels, throwing all the bricks down onto the ground below, and hoping to come down to some place where he would find something valuable. They did an enormous amount of damage, which makes the archaeologists shudder these days, but those were the days before archaeology really was born. And so Taylor had no experience whatsoever. And he just kept on digging down, 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 and he virtually found nothing. At last he gave up in disgust. All he had found were 4 clay cylinders inscribed with cuneiform writing, which he sent back to the British Museum with a sort of an apology. Sorry, old chaps, this is all I could find. Well, the British Museum, that was used to getting these winged bulls from Layard, was pretty disgusted. But they put these cylinders into a back room and left them there and really forgot about them. Little did they realise what a fabulous treasure they had. Well, about 20 years went by, and in the meantime, the cuneiform script became understandable. Sir Henry Rawlinson had cracked it open as a result of his study on the Behistun or Bisitun rock, and now people could read and understand the cuneiform. And so it occurred to somebody to get out these cylinders that Taylor had sent back and find out just what was written there. They discovered that it was a dedicatory cylinder in which the builder of the ziggurat, or the rebuilder of it, mentioned that he had done this reconstruction work. And it mentioned that his name was Ur-Nammu. Ur-Nammu? Could it be that this was King Nammu and he was the king of the city of Ur? Yes, indeed it was. And so it was identified as Ur of the Chaldees. That was a bit of a shock, of course, to the critics, and they had to take a back seat then. And so now Ur of the Chaldees was definitely identified as a geographical locality, and obviously a very important one too.
The Bible indicates that they left Ur in 1896 BC. Next, we will be looking at a town in modern-day Turkey called Haran. Excavations of an ancient city that still exists today as Haran began in 1951. This site has been confirmed to be the same as the ancient city of Haran. Why is this biblically important? In Genesis 11:31, we read that Abram and Terah went as far as Haran when they left Ur, and they settled there. Additionally, Terah, Abram's father, died in Haran. Here is a short video tour of Haran in Turkey to get an idea of what it was like in the days of Abram.
We're heading south toward the Syrian border. Ethnic struggles and refugees are nothing new to this land. In fact, 4,000 years ago, Abraham and his followers walked these plains searching for a homeland.
According to the Bible, Abraham settled here, in Haran, on his way to the Promised Land in Canaan. That's Israel, about 300 miles to the south. That was about 1900 BC. Haran is one of the oldest continuously inhabited places on Earth. These conical houses worked well in Abraham's day, and they still do.
The conical shape keeps the inside cool and the baby happy, even though it's well over 100 degrees outside.
Centuries of wind and warriors have rounded the corners of Haran's fortress. But it seems the people and their ways of life have changed little.
Here we see a map of the route of Abraham. They left Ur of the Chaldees and followed the river Euphrates north to Haran. Then later, after living in Haran with his father for some time, Abram left Haran for Canaan. Abram left Haran around 1871 BC. Next, we will go to the eastern shore of the Dead Sea in Jordan. In Genesis 19, we read about Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed with fire and brimstone from heaven. This event also happened in Abram's time while his nephew Lot lived in Sodom. Let's watch a short video that briefly explores the fact that archaeological evidence has been found for Sodom and Gomorrah.
Did you know archaeologists have discovered the ancient sites of Sodom and Gomorrah mentioned in Genesis? God said in chapter 19 that the cities were so evil he was going to destroy them. The ruins are southeast of the Dead Sea near the modern-day cities of Babadra and Numeria in Jordan. Archaeologists have made some startling discoveries in the cemetery at what was once Sodom. They found that the building used to bury the dead were destroyed by a fire which started on the roof. Why is that so strange? Conquering nations would not have bothered to burn a burial building because the people inside were already dead. And a fire starting on the roof and burning down rather than from low or inside where a person would be is an indication that the fire came out of the sky. Dr. Bryant Wood explains what he found while digging at the site.
We have abundant evidence for petroleum products in this area and for sulfur deposits. And it seems quite likely that the cause of that destruction was earthquake activity, which caused some of these materials to be released from underground and shot into the air and ignited, and then fell back down on the cities, thus destroying them as the Bible describes.
The Lord rained down sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore, I did away with them as you have seen.
The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed in 1850 BC. Archaeologists have identified Ur, Haran, Sodom and Gomorrah, and all of these cities provide confirmation for the biblical history of Abraham, who lived until 1775 BC. Our next stop is in El Gaba, Egypt. In Genesis 37, we read about Joseph being taken as a slave to Egypt. And in Genesis 41, we see how God gave him favor in the eyes of Pharaoh. This video explores the archaeological evidence for the Israelites, and in particular, Joseph in Egypt.
A man who steers his people and his king through great adversity might expect a big reward. So, did Joseph get one? As a reward for his achievements, Joseph asks Pharaoh if his family can settle in Egypt. The Bible says Joseph and his brothers settled in a city called Ramesses. But archaeologists surveying the area could find no trace of the city. Then, in the 1970s, a farmer found the first remarkable clue: the remains of a colossal statue. Archaeologist Irina Forster-Muller thinks the statue proves that this was the site of the city mentioned in the Bible.
Ramses the Great, Ramses II, who is one of the most important kings of the New Kingdom. This is the area of Ramesses, his capital. It was a huge city in this time. We have here the statue, and we know we have a temple over there, and several other temples and villas.
The find raised hopes that this was where Joseph had settled and was reunited with his brothers. But these hopes were dashed when archaeologists established that Ramesses was built 300 years after Joseph's time. In addition, there was no sign of a Semitic presence at all. But inscriptions were then discovered suggesting that Ramesses was built on top of an older city called Avaris. If they could find it, then maybe they could find Joseph. Then they found it. Excavations are gradually revealing the secrets of Avaris. It was built 300 years before Ramesses, just when Joseph was thought to have lived. And its ruins revealed tantalizing clues. Although most of the buildings were Egyptian in style, one area was distinctly Canaanite. But the most compelling evidence of a Semitic presence came from inside the houses. These bodies were found buried in sideways postures, a typically Canaanite tradition. And objects found inside the burial pits left archaeologists in no doubt.
We have a lot of Canaanite shapes, like the jugs here, combined with Egyptian shapes, like the small vessel here. We find sometimes weapons attached to the tombs, like this sword. It's made of bronze. And then with the same tomb comes a belt in very fragile condition, which the male burial had around his hip. So we have always the mixture of both cultures.
These finds are consistent with the Bible's claim that Semites settled in the Nile Delta. But only poor Semites, perhaps slaves. none of it indicated someone of Joseph's status, a high-ranking pharaonic official of Semitic origin, lived there. But further finds at Avaris suggest that archaeologists are closing in on that elusive evidence. The excavations have since returned to agricultural use, but there are extensive plans and photos. David Roll, a specialist in biblical and ancient history, examined, then reconstructed part of the site.
To the north of where they have their dig house, they started digging in a flat field of wheat. They didn't expect to find very much, but just under the surface they found these remarkable finds. A beautiful villa, which is the quality of a palace. In fact, it probably is a palace, but it's not of a king. It's not a palace of a king. Reconstructed, you can see how complex it is. There are various elements to it built at different times. It had 12 columns along its colonnade, and that's a significant number in the Bible.
This small palace looked like the home of a high-ranking official. But it was a find at the back of the palace that most intrigued archaeologists. A tomb topped with a pyramid.
The tomb was over there, to the south of the palace, and one of the most interesting tombs was that of a dignitary with a tomb chapel. And inside this tomb chapel we found the rest of a tomb statue.
The statue had been vandalized, but when reassembled, it shocked the experts. This could not have been the statue of an Egyptian official.
When we get it back to the museum and restore it, it looks like this. And you can see that the head's been completely smashed, the lower part of the head, and the eyes have been gouged out. The most important thing is this. It's an amazing haircut. We don't see anything like that in Egypt before this time. And the hair colour is bright red. This guy had flame red hair.
The details were typical of Semitic people.
Another little detail is the skin colour. Here we can see the forehead, and this here is yellow skin, and that's typical of what the Egyptians did to represent foreigners from the north, people with pale skin.
It wasn't just on the hair and face that paint was found. Flakes of red and black paint were found on the outline of a garment, and with it a distinctive pattern. Could this be a multicolored coat? Could this be Joseph? The absence of a nameplate means there's no way of knowing, but for David Roll, there are no other contenders.
We have no other example of something quite as extraordinary as this. We have no pyramid tomb for an official of state. We have no other palace for a private individual. These sort of things are things reserved for royalty, usually. So this is extraordinary. We have no other examples to compare it to. But if you're trying to imagine the rewards of somebody who gave such service to Egypt, who saved it from the famine, you would expect these type of things to be given.
Most Egyptian tombs were stripped of treasures such as furniture, clothes, and jewelry. This tomb was no exception, but in this case, the bones were also taken away.
If a plunderer had gone in there to wreck the tomb, he would have left the bones behind. He wouldn't have taken the bones away. Bones don't have any intrinsic value. So somebody's removed the body from this tomb. Now, the story of Joseph is, at the time of Exodus, when Moses takes the Israelites out of Egypt, he takes the coffin of Joseph with him, so he would have left an empty tomb. So here we have a guy with a multicoloured coat with an empty tomb. It's got to be Joseph.
Joseph interpreted the Pharaoh's dream and came to power in 1670 BC.